Okay, we can go ahead and get started. I know we have one or two panelists who will be joining us a little bit later, but we can stop and introduce them when they're able to join. My name's Bridget. I'm a rising MS3 at GW. I'm one of the co-coordinators of health policy and advocacy for the DC Emergency Medicine Medical Student Council. And I'm going to be helping moderate tonight, but really we want this event to be super informal. So anyone can feel free to post questions in the chat throughout, and I'll be asking a few questions at the beginning, but then we want to open it up to questions from the audience. So to begin, I'm going to introduce Kritika. She is chair of the MSC, and she's just going to be talking a little bit about who we are and what we do.
Hey, Bridget, just give me 1 second. All right, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Like Bridget mentioned, I am the chair of the DC Emergency Medical Student Council this year. So I just wanted to give a brief introduction of what the MSC is and what kinds of activities we do. So just to get started, we were organized in the early 2020. So we're a pretty new organization, and we're a body of students that are interested in emergency medicine. We have about 15 members this year, and we have members on the council that are all the way from M1s to M4s and from all 3 universities in the DC area. So we have students from Howard, George Washington, and Georgetown. And we predominantly focus on emergency medicine education. So we help people get access to emergency medicine, like hands-on activities and events. And we also have subcategories of our team that work on community engagement, like fundraisers and working with local organizations, and also a health policy team that organizes some really cool events. We had some amazing panels and activities last year as well. And the team that organized this panel today was the health policy team. So here's just a small taste of some of the events we had last year. We had many more than this, but one of the things that we do regularly is a blood drive. And one of our students from last year, Jessica, really spearheaded this. So about every month or every couple months, we'll have a blood drive through Children's Hospital. This is mostly to help children with sickle cell disease get access to blood products. As you might know, there are huge shortages of blood products right now during the pandemic because people are wary to go into a hospital to give blood. So we're trying to make this more accessible for students. We've paired our blood drives with other drives as well. As you can see, we did one for a canned food drive. During Halloween, we did a little fundraiser to help children get access to toys because they couldn't go trick-or-treating. We did a program director residency panel for our rising 4th years, and we worked with DC ASAP as well as the Maryland Medical Student Council on that. So we had program directors from all the schools in the DC and Maryland area come to speak to students, which I think was very helpful for a lot of our students. And we also had an amazing panel on racial disparities in emergency medicine. And one of the benefits of the virtual setting is we had these really great speakers from all over the country that were very knowledgeable on the subject. So I think that's one of the events that a lot of students gained a lot of knowledge from. So if you're interested in getting involved in MSC events in the future, the main way that we get events broadcasted to schools is we send them to the emergency medicine groups at each of the schools to send to the student body. So look out for those emails and look out for MSC events. We also have our own social media that we post our events on. So our Instagram and Twitter are on the slide. And if you're interested in being a part of this council and getting a more hands-on involvement, look out for applications to be on the council around next March. And if you have any questions about any of this, feel free to reach out to us by email and I'll be happy to respond. Thanks so much.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm really excited for this event, mainly because we have people speaking who attended Georgetown, GW, and Howard, which is really cool. And we have both incoming residents and current residents. So I think we'll have a lot of different viewpoints, and I think we'll all be able to learn something from this. So we can just start with some introductions. Panelists, if you would just share your name, where you went to medical school, where you're going for residency, or where you're a current resident at. And then if you have any interests within the field of emergency medicine, you could share that as well. So we don't have to go in any particular order. If you all just want to try to unmute yourselves one by one, we can get started.
I can go. I'm Miriam. I'm an intern at Georgetown, and I went to medical school and undergrad at University of Virginia. And my interests lie, I think, in global health, although it's a little difficult with COVID. I was hoping to be able to travel some and do some remote rotations, but I think that that may not be a possibility until possibly my third year.
I can go next. My name is Tamara Wilson. I'm a M4 at Georgetown. I matched into EM at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. And my interests include academic medicine, maybe critical care, maybe not critical care. I also am all things DEI as well.
My name is Ayal. I'm a second-year resident at GW. I went to Tufts for medical school up in Boston. And I'm interested, I'm going to be doing a critical care fellowship and interested in kind of like the more procedural aspect of emergency medicine. I was a kind of a last-minute switch from surgery to EM and haven't quite gotten away from that itch. So.
Hi guys.
Everyone.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Happen at some point. Hi everyone. My name is Brittany Gordon. I'm an MS4 at GW who matched into EM at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And in terms of interest, I am interested in, I think, peds, EM, some critical care, and definitely medical education.
Hi guys. My name is Nadia. I'm one of the current EM2s at Georgetown. I went to the University of Pittsburgh for medical school, and I am interested in just going out into the community and working. So I am looking at kind of the job search and signing a contract in the next couple of months, which is pretty exciting.
Hi everyone, I'm Leanne. I'm an MS4 at Howard. I'm matched into emergency medicine and human health in Ohio. And I'm interested in peds, EM, and sports medicine.
What's going on, everyone? I'm Josh. I'm a fourth year at Howard. I matched EM at Yale. As far as interests, nothing in particular. I'm just going to kind of see where it goes over the next couple of years.
Hey everyone, my name is Pranav. I am a MS4 at GW, matched into EM at Northwestern in Chicago, and went to GW obviously for undergrad and med school, and then interested in admin, policy, and then possibly crit care as well.
Okay, I think that might be everyone. We're super lucky to have so many panelists today. And I think each DC school individually already had match panels that maybe focused a little bit more on the nitty-gritty details of applying, like how many programs people applied to and those specific details. So we might start off by keeping it a little bit more broad. And then if people in the audience have more specific questions, feel free to ask. But just to kick it off, we were wondering what specifically made you choose emergency medicine, and then were there other fields that you were considering, and what helped you sort of solidify your decision to pursue EM?
I can go because I definitely had, I wasn't the typical EM bound med student. Actually coming into medical school, I was very like pediatric strong because, you know, that was the exposure I had in college. My research, my mentors are mainly pediatricians. So coming in, I was like, I'm gonna become a pediatric pulmonologist because, you know, was what I knew. And towards the end of third year, when you had to decide, I knew something was off when I did, Children's National has like a pipeline program for medical students who are interested in pediatrics. And during the sessions, everyone was so excited to get back to rotations, and they scheduled all these peds elective and their peds ICU electives. And I was like, why did I schedule an adult ICU elective and then another adult rotation if I'm someone who's interested in pediatrics? And so after that, I realized that I do enjoy taking care of the adult population, and following my ICU elective, I realized I really enjoy critical care. And so I looked at fields that could get me in the door of critical care if I so desired to pursue that later on. And I think emergency medicine pretty much gave me, I guess, the best of both worlds of the things that I'm interested in. I have access to pediatric patients if I see fit. I have access to critical care, and then it's a definite additional plus with the procedures. And then also one thing I do enjoy about emergency medicine that is unique from a lot of fields is the time to really pursue social issues and policy and administrative things that affect our healthcare system. And so that's why I was like, you know what, let's give this a shot. And it also helped that one of my favorite people at GW, plug in for Dean Haywood, is an emergency medicine physician.
I guess I can add a couple of words here as well. I had the opposite experience in that I pretty much knew I was going to go into EM when I came to medical school. I had worked in the ER for almost a decade prior to coming to med school. I worked as like a clinical technician and really kind of fell in love with emergency medicine at that point. And I also knew Dean Haywood before I came to med school at GW. I knew her because I used to work I'm at med school at Georgetown, but knew her from GW when I used to work there. And I would say that EM for me was something where I tried to find other specialties that I was more passionate about, and nothing kind of floated to the top or really deterred my interest. Like at first I was interested in OB-GYN, and then a little bit in family med, and then a little bit in surgery. And I was like, well, yeah, it's still the perfect fit for me because I get experiences in one and I don't have to choose between them. So I doubled down on EM. And I really just want to say, like, at this point, if you're considering something else like an EM, I would, unless you know that 100% EM is in your heart and there's like nothing else that you think you want to do with yourself, I would really consider doing EM. But if you're someone that's like, oh, I could see myself doing anesthesia, I could see myself doing something else, I'd say maybe you should consider those other things. But at this point, like, I am happy about my decision to pursue emergency medicine. And for me, I knew just the way I was set up, there was really nothing else that I was prepared to do, just because I was so passionate about it.
So I think I got really lucky. I graduated from undergrad in 2013, and I just was not ready for medical school. I didn't think my grades were strong enough. I was like not in the right mindset. I kind of wanted to just live life a little bit. And so I ultimately got a job, and I was like, oh, well, what kind of job could help me get into medical school? I was like, oh, scribing. So I decided I scribed at Virginia Hospital Center in Arlington, Virginia for about a year and a half in the ER there. And I just really loved my job despite making, I think the first 2 months I made $8.50 an hour. And then it went up to $11 an hour eventually. And I was still like, I was poor, like half surviving off of hospital crackers and sandwiches and coffee, but I still liked life enough. And then I got to medical school and I came in with an open mind. I similarly had thought that I wanted to do pediatrics. My dad was a pediatrician. I love being around children. I was like, this is what I'm going to do. And then my heart just kept pulling me back to EM. I think I say that I think I'm lucky because I think when I started scribing, I was like very intimidated by the field. And I was like, I don't know that I necessarily would have gravitated towards it had I not had, like a year and a half exposure and really understood what emergency medicine was. But I absolutely love it. I love, being able to see people when they're at their sickest. I'd find that like when I was on like a general surgery rotation or internal medicine rotation, my favorite days were always when I would go down to the ED and do consults. And it just kind of gave me like a rush. And I remember like I had internal medicine outpatient rotation. My favorite day on the rotation was when this patient came in, like was triaged as having had like a cough and shortness of breath. And then I was like, oh, any chest pain, sir? And this patient was like, oh, actually, yeah, I've been having some crushing substernal chest pain. And then like and I was like, when's the last time you had this pain? And he was like, actually, I'm starting to get some right now. Became like profusely diaphoretic. And I was like, we need an EKG stat. And it was just exciting for me. But yeah, every rotation I found that like, I just was excited about like, you know, having a broad differential and then being able to narrow down and treat patient symptoms right away and not really know what's going on and just really be actively involved in narrowing down the differential. I think for me at times, like when I was on internal medicine, I found it frustrating. Like I would take over a patient, you know, 3 weeks into their hospital stay, and I felt like I wasn't necessarily, I kind of had a plan handed to me, but when I was in med school, I really enjoyed the broad differential. So yeah.
Kyle, I know you said you were interested in surgery as well. How did you sort of narrow down your options and what ultimately led you to EM?
Oh, I still haven't. And that's and thank God GW, our relationship with the surgery department is so great. But I forgot who said, but you know, that they were going into peds the whole time. I was going into surgery the whole time in medical school. But I was an EMT since I started at 16. So 4th year of med school, I was like, you know what, let me give EM another shot, because I loved, you know, being an EMT is what got me into becoming a doctor. And I loved both, and there wasn't, you know, I still like both. I still miss the OR, and if I was a surgery resident, I'd miss the ED, miss the resuscitation bays, like Miriam was saying, right? Like every rotation, I loved going down to the ED, and I think that's a hint. And I think you just have to, you know, one of the things that's, you know, kind of sucks is that once you choose, you have to kind of choose, and I had to say, would I rather never be in the OR again, or would I rather never like be an expert at resuscitation? The doctor, you know, who can kind of handle everything. And EM had like a bit of everything, and you kind of just felt like you belonged. But there's no bad choice. There's no wrong choice. And if you don't like residency, you can always switch. But you know, GW is great. I love EM.
Okay, if no one else has anything to add, we can move on. So a lot of our audience was wondering if you could share any tips for succeeding on EM clerkships or away rotations. And that could be like specific resources you found helpful, or how you prepared for those, or things we could just do to stand out.
Josh, you did a good job on your away rotation at GW. You should talk about that.
The first thing that comes to mind is just make sure people like you, you know, just, you know, show up, do a good job. I mean, I think it's pretty simple. Like, you've all made it this far for a reason, you know, like, you know what to do, like when you show up like for a job or anything like that, you know, just like go out of your way. You know, there may be some things that you don't want to do at the time, but again, you're only there for a month, so make the best impression that you can. For me at GW, I'd say like my first shift there was pretty hectic, because it's definitely a different scenario compared to Howard. Definitely a lot, like the volume is crazy at GW. So when I got there, I was like, oh damn, I was like, what is this? But after that first shift of like, you know, I just made sure that, you know, I just knew everything, tried to get everything down, like the MR and all that. The next thing was just working on like, you know, presenting, you know, like work on my presentation, talking to different 3rd years, 4th years, and also trying to present to the attendings. What was difficult sometimes was always trying to find an attending to present to, because they're the ones that do your they're the ones that you kind of want to ask to do your evaluations, but I think don't stress yourself out always trying to present to an attending. Again, this is my experience at GW. Again, just like make sure like when you present that, it's kind of thorough and you've practiced with your intern or whoever before you kind of get that final presentation. And again, just like doing whatever you can to go out of your way and just leave a good impression. The resources I used Quick EM. It's like an app. It's like a phone app. I used that one from time to time. I also used Wiki EM. It's another app that you can get on your phone. I think those were the two major ones I kind of used like in the ED. Like if there was something I just had like no idea, like, okay, like how do I manage this and all that. But I think for the most part, a lot of it was kind of just like repeat of like things I learned during third year. Like someone comes in with like abdominal pain, you kind of know what to order, you kind of know like the diagnosis, the differential diagnoses, and how to work it up. So I think for me, what helped me is I had a little notebook also, and in the back, like, so it's pretty much my notebook, like where like it's like what I used to present from. And in the back of that book, I just made a quick list of like, common things that you see in the ED. Someone comes in with like chest pain. So in case I forgot something, I could just like open up real quick to the back of my notebook, be like, oh, I want to make sure I throw this on the test too, or I want to make sure that they do this also. And then I'd make sure to add that in my presentation.
Yeah, one thing I'd add is kind of what separates good medical students from great medical students on an away rotation is if they act kind of like an intern. And medical students are great at seeing a patient, reporting back, and then often that's where their interaction stops. And if you take ownership of your patient, you go back and assess their pain. Hey, how is the Tylenol I'm doing going? Hey, is this patient ready to be discharged? Hey, I think this patient's ready to be admitted. Or hey, this is what their like CT scan showed, their labs showed. Like that in my mind separates the good ones. Like you have your people who are weird, who like don't interact well with patients. And you have your really good medical students who are really good at reporting, come up with a great differential, come up with like really good tests that they want to order. And then the great ones are the ones who take tasks off my plate without me asking, right? And go back and say, hey, I just spoke to blah, blah, blah. Their nausea and vomiting is getting better. They feel great after the fluids and they'd like to go home. And I'm like, yeah, good job, Pranav. Like that's what we wanted to see. So that's great. I mean, it takes time to get there, but.
Oh, so I'll add on to that. That's huge because that brought me back to like a few different residents I worked with. Like they're like, oh wow, like I really like that you went to go check on the patient. Me, I thought I was just doing like my regular job. I was just like there. After like a couple minutes, say I'm gonna finishing my analysis report. That me, I just thought that's just like what everyone's doing. But I guess the residents really loved that. I was like, all right, cool. I'm just gonna keep doing it.
Yeah, so the one thing that I'll add here, as far as resources that I use, there's a podcast called EM Clerkship. This guy gives you 20 steps to like really honor your away rotation. And I listened to that probably, I listened to it multiple times throughout the month, but I literally had those 20 things down, and there are things is like common sense is like, make sure you're showing up early for your shifts, make sure you're being nice to people, all the things that Ayal and Pranav have both said, but other things like, being willing to go the extra mile and get the patient a blanket and all these things like that are going to help you ace your clerkship. The other resource that I use, like if you guys haven't already joined EMRA, I would say, please go ahead and pay that whatever $40 to join. They're going to send you a little like box full of like pocket notebooks. And I remember using those pocket notebooks. Like I don't have any right now, they're all in my white coat pocket. But they're like a book for antibiotics, a book for like common ER diagnoses. And I remember when I was stuck on my differentials, like in between patients, I would like open up the book and like look at it. I think they also maybe have an app now for this as well. But sometimes like sometimes at the different facilities that you're at, they may or may not frown upon like you being super engaged with your phone. So I said I was going to take all of that out of the equation and use the pocket notebooks to look up diagnoses and to be engaged and have ideas for what to do. You're not getting like overwhelmed in the like day to day of like, oh my God, I messed up that presentation. But really by the end of your, 3 or 4 weeks in that location, the attendings, what they write about you at the end of that rotation is going to be completely different than what they write about you at the beginning of that rotation. So try not to get bogged down in the day to day, like, common things.
I only did one away rotation. I went to UVA, and then I was very interested in being in the DC area. I did my a 1 month rotation at Georgetown, but that's where I knew I wanted to be. And so my approach was, it's 30 days, and like you've worked your whole life, honestly, I feel like I've been building up to being a doctor since I was probably like working hard at like age 10. So I basically just gave it everything that I had. And what I did was, before my rotation, I made sure I studied my EKGs. I studied my EKGs for only like about 2 weeks, but I like really studied EKGs. I studied how to read a chest x-ray, made sure that I was like confident in my approach. Like, what approach was I gonna use when I was reading chest x-rays? And sure enough, like, one day I worked with one of the APDs at Georgetown, and we went through, she was like, show me how you would read this chest x-ray, show me how you would read this EKG. And just like things like that, I think made a huge difference. Like, I really was prepared, and I like maybe, 2 months later, I didn't necessarily remember my perfect approach to reading the chest x-ray, but right before this one of the most important months of my life, I really just tried my best to prepare for it. I think that's important. I also think, as other people have mentioned, just like workflow dynamics and like your ability to, interact with nurses and techs and residents. I think you want to just make sure that you're being helpful to the team. I think even if you think, oh, like, helping this tech out or whatever might not be the most useful, the best use of my time, like, residents definitely see that, and attendings definitely see all of that. So just, try to be a team player. I think that's important. And yeah, I think I also, like Tamara, really would recommend using the EMRA kind of just most common presentation EM guide and EMRA antibiotic app if you don't have that. I think just kind of, as Ayal was saying, like, some med students that are great will like give a perfect history, perfect physical, but they're kind of lacking in terms of the plan. Like, even if you're completely wrong, like, just saying like, oh, by the way, I think we should give them 4 milligrams of Zofran or whatever. Like, they're a little nauseous. Like, just like mentioning, oftentimes I feel like as residents, we're so busy, like we'll forget like, oh, oh, they do have a headache. It's minor, but like they probably would benefit from some Tylenol. Just like creating a plan. I think even if it's wrong, I think it's good to show that you're, confident enough that you would be willing to just kind of throw out something, because that's what you'll be doing as an intern.
And just to add something really quickly, I think something that's also important is to just be teachable. I think that, even if we're not always right, like, even if you're not always right, which you'll never be, just be willing to accept criticism. Don't get defensive. Like, just because they correct you, it doesn't mean that you're going to get a bad evaluation. So just use that moment, grow from it, and try not to make the same mistake again. And then that will reflect positively on your evaluation.
That's awesome. That's all super helpful advice. I was trying to write that all down for my clerkship. Something that I think has been on a lot of people's minds lately, and it's not exactly the most uplifting thing to talk about in a group of people that are all interested in emergency medicine, but there is a lot of uncertainty in the field about surrounding the job market. So I was wondering if you all could maybe share what you would say to a medical student who is super interested in emergency medicine and just kind of being inundated with this news of poor job prospects and a scary climate for emergency medicine doctors.
So we actually just spent an hour talking about this at our conference a couple of weeks ago, the day after that big ASAP report dropped and after that big meeting. I wasn't there for the meeting because I was working overnight, but this is something that I think I have thought a lot about. You know, being a second year who's looking at like signing a contract and interviewing for jobs in the next couple of months. And it's scary, you know, and I think anybody who tells you that it isn't important or that they're not worried about it, I think isn't really being 100% truthful. But it's, you know, I think there are a lot of different factors that aren't going to go away anytime soon, and a lot of them are outside of our control. So what I would say to medical students is the same thing that I've been telling myself, which is that you know, you have this like really incredible period of growth in front of you. You're going to have a huge learning curve, and you have to kind of focus on the things that are inside your control, which is becoming a better doctor. And you know, the market, I think, will settle out. I think COVID kind of exacerbated a problem, you know, that had been growing for a couple of years, but it's not, you know, it's not something that is worth kind of directing your time and your energy towards when we don't have control over that part of the future. But there will be jobs and there will be a market to come back to. You don't have to switch out of emergency medicine. And it's, you know, it's something also that's happening in all specialties. It's happening in anesthesia, it's happening in primary care, pediatrics. You know, there are very few kind of realms of medicine where this isn't an issue, but you know, just stay focused on your training and why you went into medicine, and things are going to work themselves out.
So the one thing I'll add to that is that if you haven't already and you're considering emergency medicine, you should read the ASAP report for yourself. Like, don't rely on social media and like Student Doctor Network to make your decisions for you. Like really educate yourself on what specifically the issues are on the horizon in the EM. And I would say like pretty much stay away from SDN and Reddit subthreads. They're like, there's nothing but like the most worried people in the world that go there and vent about how worried they are. I would say it's better to ground yourself in people that you're trusted, that know specifically about the field, like your advisors at your program or at any of the programs in this town, right? So those are people that are on the ground, that really know the field, that are connected, that know what the job, you know, they're the people that are getting recruited by recruiters, not like the people who are sitting at home posting stuff on Reddit, right? So if I'll Google it, the ASAP report, and I think it's a video as well. You can like watch it on your own time. But I think like what I would have appreciated about our cycle, so I just matched into EM, and like 3 Fridays ago, this news came out, and what I appreciate for you all is the transparency and the willingness to make these decisions with having a full spectrum of information, right? So you have to kind of educate yourself. If you're one of those people that like, I'm gonna go into EM because it's like exciting and it's fun and I'm gonna make a lot of money, and you know, like that, you know, prospect about the field, it may or may not be true in the next like 2 to 3 years. Like there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And so I wouldn't say like, don't go into EM. Like, I'm not here to tell you like, if this is your dream, not to pursue it. What I'm saying is that, you know, consider all the information, and also consider the fact that the market will likely correct itself in the next couple of years, and go into it making a very educated decision about your future and about, you know, what type of medicine you will be practicing.
I'll add my two
Um,
cents to that.
yeah,
Um,
I'm jinxed.
oh, my bad, Brittany, you want to go?
No, I'm just jinxed. You can go.
No, so I mean, the way I view it is, am I concerned about finding a job once I finish residency? Not necessarily. I think, I mean, there's still a shortage of physicians, right? Like, I mean, no matter what you say, like, no matter what you hear, there's still going to be a shortage of physicians. You may not find a job in the ideal location, so I think it's just a matter of keeping, you know, your I think just keeping your choices open. Like, you know, you may have to move to a different state, right? Like if you're looking for a job like in a big city like Boston, DC, you'll probably find a job. You may not be making the type of money that you want to make, or then again, you may not find a job, but there's always going to be a job out there. You're just going to have to, I don't know, be flexible and be willing to move. I think when it comes like, I think that's what it comes down to. So if your concern is like, I'll go into EM is like, oh, I'm not going to be able to find a job. I mean, if you're just bent on like, you know, staying in DC and not really traveling outside of DC, then, you know, that may be the case, right? But I think at the end of the day, like if you're flexible, then you're still going to find a job somewhere.
I think I was just going to add, and future Dr. Wilson actually just put it in the chat. There's a really nice webinar that ACEP did on the 9th. And I think if you listen to what they're saying and the information there is very valuable, I'm not going to say everything's going to make you smile and sigh in relief, but it will give you the facts. And I think you should take this information into account when making your decision of your specialty. But also, if this is something that you do see yourself doing and you can't see yourself doing anything else, I would not let this information deter you, but be informed in the decision that you are making.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on that. I think that is very reassuring for a lot of us to hear. I'm sure many of us in the audience are sort of set on EM and have been from the start. So it's really nice to hear your thoughts. Now we're going to transition a little bit and talk about interview season. I think we're really lucky to have panelists who participated in both virtual and in-person interviews and to hear sort of your different experiences with that. So I guess we could just start by talking about how you prepared for interviews and then maybe what were some of the challenges or the benefits of your respective interview styles, whether you did in person or virtual.
Yeah, I can take a stab at the first part of that question, at least, with regards to preparing for interviews. So obviously, I'm not sure entirely if every program has decided yet what they're going to do for next year in terms of whether they're going to stay with the virtual formats or return to the traditional like in-person. But regardless of that fact, I think the big thing about preparing for the whole interview process in and of itself is a lot of the research you're going to do about the programs that you applied to in the first place. And so, you know, figuring out, obviously that starts with like introspection and figuring out what you value and want in a program, which I'm sure we can talk about as well. And like, what are the traits to look out for in a program, but identifying those things first and early on and will really help you kind of shape the programs you look to apply to, whether that means a 3-year program versus a 4-year program, whether that's academic or a county or a community program. And then building on that research and getting a little more into the weeds of like, okay, like you're a 3-year county program, but you know, what does that really mean for me and what kind of applicant am I for your program and what kind of resident will I turn out to be if I go to this program? And so I think being able to answer those types of really basic questions, which I think at this point, all of you are familiar with through the med school application process of like, why, you know, X program, being able to have like a good, reasonable answer to that, I think is, you know, really key. And there's obviously everyone has different factors for that, whether it's geography, whether it's you know, career and professional decisions, family. And so being able to speak to those things, I think are, and speak to them passionately, I think are really, really important for the interview process. But obviously that's, you know, interviews are also really, you know, challenging to get sometimes. And so you don't always know what programs you're going to end up interviewing at. So with the kind of rapid response rate of interviews, it's really good to, you know, be able to have a quick like spreadsheet or a fact sheet of really important key things for like even your handful of favorite programs, to know that, so that if you do have an interview like in 2 days, that you're not scrambling to learn everything about the program from their website.
I would say make sure you guys know your file, know your application. You don't want to be asked a question and not be able to answer it. I think it almost happened to me because there was one volunteer experience that I had on my application that for some reason I just kind of blanked when they were asking me. I was able to figure it out along the way. I was answering. But you don't want that to happen to you. And I'd also say just prepare for those like cliche questions like, oh, tell me about a time you had to overcome a challenge. I personally hated those types of interviews because I feel like I feel like you don't learn much about someone when they're giving you a rehearsed answer. I preferred the interviews that were, you know, more conversational, like they're actually trying to get to know me. But I'm sure you guys like, you know, will be like get a document with like 50 or 60 questions of those types of questions, you know, like tell me about a challenge or tell me about, you know, a particularly hard time in your life, like those types of questions. So I'd say just, you know, make sure you prepare some answers for those types of questions.
And then just to piggyback off that, I think there's value in doing, even if it's virtual or in person, doing mock interviews. You should definitely reach out to faculty members who, you know, interview to just do a little session with you, because you can practice on paper and answer those questions, but there's little intricate things about, especially when I was doing it, how you say things, like how you sound when you're saying something that you don't really pick up on, but another person can. So I think doing at least one mock interview, maybe not more than 3, because too many cooks kind of spoil the pot. So I think you should definitely do some practice session with a faculty member or someone who does interviews before going in.
Oh, and of course, everyone's going to tell you to make sure that you have an answer to the like why you want to do EM question, just kind of in the back of your pocket, because people are going to ask you why you see yourself in their program and why EM.
I'm hoping that you guys will be able, some of you that are applying this coming year will be able to have in-person interviews, but I would definitely say for any program that you're remotely interested in, you should attend the program dinner beforehand. I know I wasn't able to for one, I interviewed at like 5 New York programs, and I attended all but one interview dinner, and it was for a pretty decent program. And I decided to have dinner with my aunt instead. And the resident was like, was like very upset that I didn't attend the interview dinner the night beforehand. So I mean, luckily that wasn't one of my top choices, but I think some people, I guess I found, could get upset about not attending the interview dinner. So I would just definitely make that a priority if possible.
Ooh. And then I'm sorry, the one thing I would also add is in this virtual season, the programs actually started doing these Zoom sessions, and those will likely start probably in the middle of the summer. And I felt a great deal of fatigue with Zoom by the end of the interview season. So make sure you're kind of like balancing, like showing interest and getting information from the programs in these Zoom sessions, but also realizing that like some programs it actually doesn't like factor into your like interest in the program. Some programs it does. But just know that like towards the end of the interview season, you might get really tired of being on Zoom, but the catch-22 is that those Zooms will allow you to see really valuable information about the residents and like how they interact and learn info about the program. So just kind of like navigate very cautiously and balance, you know for yourself when enough is enough. So just kind of balance like the participation in all of the Zoom events, because trust me, there will be a lot of program specific Zooms.
I see that we just had one more panelist join. Hi, Nellie. If you wouldn't mind just sharing where you go to medical school, where you'll be going for residency, and if you have any particular interests in the field of EM. And then the question we were discussing right when you joined is how people prepared for interviews. So if you have any tips for that as well, feel free to chime in.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Nellie. I'm at Georgetown currently with Tamara. Nice to see you here, friend. And some other friendly faces from MSC. Hey, guys. So I'm matched at Mass Gen Brigham up in Boston. So I'm really excited about that. And I thank you for the huzzah. I appreciate that. So in terms of the question on the floor, how to prepare for interviews themselves, I think the advice I would give you is, one, make sure that you've run through some of the like high yield questions that you know are going to come up on every interview, right? Like why emergency medicine, like biggest successes, biggest failures you've had to overcome, like kind of the questions you know they're going to ask, because you're going to get them at some point during the interview season. So I would just tell you to practice them and actually like go through the like work of practicing your answers aloud to a friend or a roommate, so you can get kind of through the awkward stumbling of trying to figure out what you're going to say as you're saying it, so that by the time you hit the interview floor, you're like very streamlined and it sounds polished without sounding like over rehearsed. You know what I mean? So just as you kind of prep for those kind of higher yield questions, which there are like websites that have these commonly asked questions. I think the ones I was frequently asked were, again, why EM, biggest successes or failures, like something you've had to overcome, talking about leadership experience, and just making like, 2 or 3 bullet points of things I would try to hit without actually writing out every word that I would say. And I think doing that a couple times before you hit your first or second interview is really helpful. I would also tell you in your resume and in your answers to things on ERAS, they're going to look at your personal statement and resume like right before they interview you. Like that's the last thing they'll usually see. So trying to make that information as, personal as possible, especially in the like hobbies and interests section of ERAS. I feel like I got asked questions about my undefeated Harry Potter trivia more than I got asked about my interest in emergency medicine sometimes. So like, I think adding little details that are very specific to you, those get asked on the interview trail because they're memorable. And then when the schools go back and say, oh yeah, that girl, like they kind of include some of those descriptors or memorable tidbits. Oh, and Bridget, you also asked me any specific like sub areas of interest in EM. My big area of interest is disaster medicine. So having to do with, response, Doctors Without Borders, that sort of thing. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We're glad you're here. I'm going to throw out one quick question for the current residents. And so you guys have obviously been in your programs for a while now. So is there anything that you could advise soon to be applicants that they should specifically look out for in a program, like things you really love about your program specifically? And then sort of on the other hand, things that maybe should be avoided. And we're all just medical students here, so I think we can speak freely.
So one thing that I really like about my program, and one of the things that made me particularly interested in it, was the fact that, is the fact that we have somewhat limited off-service rotation. We have somewhat limited off-service rotations. Where I went to med school, interns did like a month of pediatric general surgery, which I was like, this makes no sense. Like I will never have to use this in my life ever. And where I interviewed at certain places, they did have a lot of like just random rotations where I was like, okay, I'm essentially, a free worker just filling a void. I very much so appreciate the fact that in my program, we essentially do EM, we do a couple of pediatric months, and then we, for the most part, do ICU work, which is directly pertinent, to the rest of my life, as opposed to just kind of being a filler, as just like a work soldier. I was definitely looking into those kind of things when I was interviewing, and I'm very appreciative. Like, I feel like each month I'm not just there to fill a space. Like, I feel like I'm there learning what I need to be learning.
I go to the same program as Miriam. And I think, I was lucky enough when I was a medical student to rotate at Georgetown before matching there, but I still think the strongest aspect of our program is just the people. So I'd say wherever you rotate and wherever you interview, from, the residents that you meet to the attendings, like, just pay attention to how people treat you. You should, you're trying to impress them, but they should also really trying to be impressing you. And these are the people who are going to be responsible for a lot of your learning and a lot of your growth and development as a young doctor. And residency is hard, it's hard in the best of times. It's harder when you go through a global pandemic. But, choose a program where you feel supported, and choose a program where you feel like, these people are really going to go to bat for you. And I think that's the most important thing when you're looking at kind of prospective universities.
Yeah, I agree with
Oh, sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
after you, Miriam.
I was going to say, another thing that I found was like particularly remarkable was the fact that so many of the attendings had attended residency, at least for us, like at Georgetown, or at, had worked at Hospital Center before. And I think that speaks to just what a great resident culture, a program can have. If you were treated like crap, like, why would you ever stay at a program for 15 years, as an attending? So, I would, not that every program has to retain a high number of their residents, but I think that that if you're kind of looking for kind of more so, objective interpretations of like a culture's program, I think looking at like the percentage, or just like making sure that there are some retained residents at whatever program that you interview at, or specifically speaking to people that did train there and asking them why they did choose to stay, I think that that could be useful.
Yeah, I think I want to echo what Nadia said, is that no matter where you go, you're going to be a good doctor, right? And Student Doctor Network is going to tell you to ask questions like, who intubates in the trauma bay, and 3 versus 4 year programs, and like, do you ever call anesthesia down to intubate, and like, what are some other things that students always ask that I'm just like, oh, like, I remember caring about that. And then you get here and you're like, wait, I'm going to be a good doctor. I'm going to be able to intubate. I'm going to be able to run a trauma. Like, 3 versus 4 year programs, like, you're going to be a good doctor no matter what. And it's important to make sure that the people you're doing this experience with, you like. And it's important to see your relationship with the attendings, the relationships with each other. And I think the place you see that the most is on these, like Miriam said, on the dinners. Like, do the residents interact with each other and have fun? Is there intermingling between the different classes? And would you feel comfortable going to your program director with a problem? Like Dr. Colleen Roche is our program director, and I text her and my mentor, David Yamane, probably more than most other people in my life. And I think that's what's really important. And then if you find a couple places where you're like, these are my people, then I think you start asking those other questions. Like, do I want some off service rotations to learn about what like inpatient side is like? Do I want a lot of research? What's also important is like where you want to live, right? Like we've been trained in med school to kind of put our own social lives and personal lives aside for the sake of like academia. And in reality, it's like, if you're young and single, do you want to live in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania? Maybe, but like, maybe you want to live in the city, or maybe you want to live close to family because that's important to you, or maybe you want to try somewhere completely new. So just echo what Nadia said, is like, you got to find your people and you get a gut feeling, and then the other stuff is important, but like less important to who you go through the process with than like who intubates in the trauma bay and things like that.
That's great. I'll open this question up to everyone, including the incoming residents, what factors you prioritized when you were applying to EM residency programs. And then I'll stop talking after this because I realize that it is getting late, and if anyone has to leave, we completely understand. And if you feel comfortable, maybe you could drop your contact information in the chat if anyone has further questions. And then if anyone is willing to stick around for a little while longer, we would love to open it up to questions from the audience.
I'll start. For me, it's funny. I didn't want to go to a 4-year program. Like I really thought I was only gonna do heavily rank 3-year programs. I ended up at a 4-year, but I'm happy.
Same, and then I ended up at GW. So.
Yeah, if you guys knew me like at the beginning of the application season, you'd be like, yo, how'd you end up at a 4-year program? Because I was really against it. I was like, I just don't want to be in training for like 4 years. But then I changed my rank list like last minute. And I'm glad I did, to be honest, because I thought about it. I'm like, all right, is that 1 year really gonna be awful? Like, is it really gonna be that bad? If it's gonna, benefit me in the long run. So I switched that. One thing that, I definitely wasn't going to do is I'm against 12-hour shifts, like in residency. I know me personally, so I'd say just make sure you guys know yourselves. If you can do 12-hour shifts, then, go for it. Like my brother, he's an EM resident in New York right now, and he's doing 12-hour shifts, and it's not a good time for him. He's going to make it through, but I know like I couldn't survive it. So for me, like, I think I maxed, I was like, all right, 10 hours is where, I'll cut it off. So all the programs I applied to, I made sure before I interviewed like at any program, or even before I applied to any programs, like I tried to find out whether they did 12-hour shifts. Cause if it was something like they only did on the weekends, I was okay with that. But if it was something like, like you're doing like 16 or 17 12-hour shifts a month, like I was like, all right, like I'm not going to enjoy that. Like that's not going to be fun for me. Because, I do enjoy doing things outside of, medicine, and staying healthy, staying fit, that's also important to me. So I always have to make sure like mental health and like physical health like comes first before anything else. So yeah, 12-hour shifts, like it just wasn't for me. So I say that was the number one thing. I was like, all right, like I can't go anywhere that does like 12-hour shifts. So I'd say just knowing yourselves before you apply to a program, and thinking, okay, am I going to be able to do this for 3 or 4 years, is what's going to come down to when it comes to, like, what am I really looking for in a program?
I was the exact opposite. I was like gung-ho 4-year program. And now I'm going to a 3-year program. And I even had an existential crisis putting in my rank list. I was like, what am I doing? But I think you really have to trust yourself and trust the decisions that you're making. You've gotten yourself this far in your career. And if you see a program standing out to you, whether it's the people, whether it's the curriculum, whether it's the opportunities that it affords to you, then go with that decision. Because 3 years or 4 years or New York's different. Let's say DC or Maryland, in the end, it's all about like the training that you get, but also if you can survive the training that you're in. You want to be happy during residency. From what I know, from what I've been told, it is a very like strenuous process. I just got my schedule and I realized I don't have summer vacation anymore. I don't have winter break where I can just go home to Jamaica anytime I feel like I can. So you definitely want to be somewhere where you feel supported and you feel like you will accomplish the things that you need to accomplish during your training period.
I can go next. I had a somewhat different approach. So I was kind of a non-traditional med student in that I had a career in public health before coming to med school. So I approached these interviews just like I would any other job interview. So my number one factor for me was, did I like the program director? Because in my mind, that was going to be my boss. And I wanted that person to be, someone I who would like have my back and be friendly and nice, but was also going to be somebody who would like push me and challenge me and have my back if I made a mistake. So I felt like that was kind of my number one criteria. And it also played into my thinking about how long the program director had been there. Program directors tend to have like a shelf life, if you will, of like 5 to 10 years, kind of max. They're the occasional exceptions to that rule, but for places that had a program director that had been there for 9-10 years, I was like, okay, these people are probably not going to stick around for the entirety of my 4 years. So that was a big factor for me, and I know that wasn't always how people approached it, but that was number one for me. Second thing, again, had to do with people. So as I mentioned, my area of interest is disaster medicine. So I really looked for who were going to be my mentors, and like, were there people in the fellowship program or in the residency that had that similar area of interest or passion, and did I like them? Because essentially I would be asking them to, take me under their wing and be their little mentee for the next couple of years. So did I really want to work with them? Would I want to do projects with them? That sort of thing. And the last thing just had to do with the vibe I got from the other residents. So like I think Miriam was saying earlier, going to that dinner beforehand is really important, because not only did they sometimes ask you like, oh, did you go to the dinner? But also I had one program where no residents showed up to the dinner. That was like a huge red flag for me about the program itself and how seriously they took that event. I had another dinner where I realized everybody in the program was married except for like 4 residents. And I was like, oh, me as a single person is going to feel like very different in this environment. So just trying to you kind of get a sense of like what the vibes are. And I feel like even virtually that is really important. Those are my top 3.
Yeah, big red flag if residents don't show up to the resident dinner. Just a plug. Even during the pandemic, for example, like our program will give us free dinner. They'll pay up to like $25, and most of us are like, oh yeah, $25 free delivery sounds great. And I think for the most part, we're all really happy. So we're happy to show up. But yeah, if there's only like one resident during a resident dinner, it's probably not the best sign that everyone's happy.
The last thing that I'll say that hasn't already been mentioned is, for me, I was looking at the balance between county and academic. And I'm someone that came in this knowing that I wanted to do the academic route. And even as I was making my list of programs that I was applying to, I was making sure that I was applying to programs that had medical schools associated with the hospital, so that I could potentially be in some type of teaching role for medical students behind me. Whether or not, that program was like a quote unquote county hospital or a teaching hospital, because there are county hospitals that medical students do rotate through. It's a very kind of confusing and nuanced system. Like there's really kind of the line between county and academic is blurred at several programs. So you can go to some county programs and get really good academic teaching exposure. So I had those programs on my list, but I eliminated all the programs where I knew that those opportunities wouldn't be available for me. And then I also eliminated programs where I was thinking at the time that I'm going to be or would like to do some type of fellowship experience. And programs that floated a little bit higher up my list were programs that had actual fellows in those programs. So I don't remember who said this before, but I think it was Nellie who said that she wanted to be around people who could mentor her in that path that she's interested in going around. And it's kind of difficult to see yourself going into toxicology if your program doesn't have a toxicology fellow or anyone that you're like making those networks with. Not to say it's impossible, but there's one thing that I considered when I was narrowing down my list. And then finally, when I was narrowing down my list, like there was a point where I got to the point where I was like, okay, I have to start turning down interviews, and this is a great position to be in. And the way that I started doing that is if I knew that there was no possibility that I would want to end up in that city, like either distance from my family or coldness or other red state things that I didn't want to have to deal with, I would eliminate that program from my list. Like there's no point in interviewing somewhere where you don't even see yourself going to live. And that really helped me make some decisions as to like where I wanted to see myself in the future.
So I'm gonna add really quickly to this because I actually have to head out. Another thing that was important for me was diversity. And it seemed like this past cycle, I would just say be wary of like the programs that are kind of just like talking about it, but aren't really showing it. So there's a difference between like some programs like talking about like diversity, and then when you look at their residents and their past residents, like there really isn't any diversity at all. Versus the ones that they have like consistent history of like being diverse. So that was important for me also. So I don't know what the climate's going to be like this time around, like this year. But diversity is something that's important to you. Again, I'd say that's just another step that you're gonna have to take towards like looking at programs. You're gonna have to research program. Also, don't be afraid to contact people. There was a program. The program I had number 2 wasn't particularly diverse. And I made sure to like talk to people that went there. So I talked to a few past residents and talked about their experience there, and it seemed pretty cool. So I felt comfortable with them at number 2. So I would just say if that's something that you're looking into and you feel like your program isn't particularly diverse and that's what you're looking for, I say just like contact people. Whether it's like anyone that's currently there or someone that was there.
Or even like EM mentors that you have, like attendings, and they can contact some of their maybe like former residency classmates or just people that they know. We're obviously all going to be networking. I'm sure we'll see each other at conferences for the rest of our lives. But I think that's an important resource to utilize. Just, I think for myself personally, like I feel like I've grown up, I've moved around a lot, and I've had friends from all different backgrounds. And I found that my med school was not all that diverse, but my residency is, and it's been like, I think made a huge difference in terms of my practice and confidence. And I'm really glad that I matched where I did, but I didn't realize like how much of an impact like having, actual faculty and attendings that were diverse. And that's like not just, in terms of, ethnicity, but having female ED attendings, having people from different, LGBTQ backgrounds as well. That's not something that existed for me, like as much as a med student where I was for med school. And I found that it's just been really a wonderful experience. So yeah.
Can I make one last comment?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, sorry. So I thought we were trying to leave, but I was just gonna say in parting from me that if you're someone at Howard and you're having trouble finding an away rotation, and I know that there's no home EM department there. I'm sure that there's someone over at GW that can also help with this, but I would say it's a very good idea to reach out to the clerkship director, Dr. Nabel at Georgetown, because I know that there's a scholarship, like I don't even remember the name of it, but there's a scholarship for underrepresented minorities. They tried to actually make sure that people from Howard have that away rotation experience at one of the hospitals. I think all of the hospitals in the area, like UMD, Hopkins, GW, and Georgetown, all the program directors know each other, and they get people like access to the experiences that they need to have in order to graduate without having to travel far from the DC area. So I would recommend contacting Dr. Nabel, which Nellie has, thank you so much, dropped in the chat. If you're having trouble, I would say around like August or September of this year, finding a place if you don't already have one by then. But it would be a good idea to start reaching out to those clerkship directors at the neighboring institutions now, just to make sure that you have a away rotation if you can't find them.
Well, I just want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists, to everyone who will be graduating very soon. Congratulations, and I wish you all the best in residency. And thank you so much to the residents for spending your night off with us. We really appreciate it. If anyone else has a last minute question, feel free to chime in, but anyone can head out now if they need to. And this session will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel in case anybody has a friend who wanted to be here who couldn't be. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, guys.